Hello and welcome to the Transcend and Succeed Show. I'm your guest host, Megan North. Firstly, I would like to thank our wonderful sponsors of the show, Quantum Awakening, Voyage of Transcendence, myself, and our lovely guest who paid to be featured on the show today. And talking about our lovely guest, today I'm joined by a beautiful woman who brings calm and self-reflection as soon as you start a conversation with her. Barbara J. Hunt is a forgiveness specialist, speaker, workshop leader, and best-selling award-winning author of Forgiveness Made Easy, the revolutionary guide to moving beyond your past and truly letting go. She has over 30 years experience in personal and spiritual development as a mentor, coach, and group facilitator. Her work has been to collect and synthesize the best of mental and emotional wellbeing practices, and her next book will be about the 5 essential tools and techniques that can dramatically enhance our inner resilience and transform the quality of our lives. She leads online forgiveness field workshops and other courses on inner wellbeing. She works in private practice internationally and on bespoke retreats in rural Somerset in the United Kingdom. Barbara is also a musician and singer-songwriter and has recorded several CD albums and singles, including her song for international peace. The first 2 singles from her new album, Wake Up as One, have just been released, and she's also working on her next 2 books. Oh my gosh, Barbara, I'm exhausted reading all about this and what you're doing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's all right if you spread it out over a life.
Yeah, you're not doing this in the next 5 minutes.
No. Yeah.
So Barbara, forgiveness. So what is unique about your approach to forgiveness?
Well, there's a few things. One is that I tend to take it into more of a secular practice rather than, even though it is a spiritual practice. And if people have a spiritual or religious upbringing or, something that they have a spiritual life or an aspiration, it's included. But I wanted to have a wider embrace because I think it's such an essential mental and emotional well-being tool that if you don't have a spiritual upbringing, that you might have overlooked it. You might not have thought, okay, this is something that could be really helpful for my life or relevant to my experience. Mm-hmm. So partly, it's my secular approach, but also I'm curious about why we don't forgive, what gets in the way and why it's so hard. Because I think just in general, we know that forgiveness is beneficial, that it's actually better for you probably to forgive than not forgive. And so I've always been fascinated why we find it so hard and what we can do about it. And so that was really why I wrote my book. Was I was thinking, it's obvious that it's beneficial. And, if you think about the exemplars of forgiveness, I was just trying to think, Nelson Mandela and some of the women who went through Auschwitz, who are currently writing, like Eva Kor and Edith Eger. You know that the exemplars of forgiveness have this. There's something about them that makes them like a great being. You think, how is it possible for these people to forgive these atrocities? And there are some amazing stories. And sometimes that can distance us thinking, well, is it relevant for me? Maybe I haven't got such a big thing that needs to be forgiven. So is it even relevant? You just think forgiveness is out there for, world leaders or whatever. And so my interest really is in everyday forgivenenness and making it personal for us and how that can impact our mental and emotional well-being and our relationships, of course. Mm-hmm. As well as being relevant to more challenging circumstances, of course.
Yeah. And so what is it about forgiveness? Why has it captured you so much? Is it something that has been a personal journey for you?
It's partly been a personal journey, but not in a traditional sense. most people who teach about forgiveness and who have some kind of like inner relationship have overcome something significant. There's been a really challenging thing that they've needed to forgive, and people have found their way to it, sometimes by grace, sometimes a miraculous something has come over them and they've been able to forgive something. My own story really is having been fascinated by personal and spiritual development since I was about 15. I read Jonathan Livingston Seagull and started asking questions about life, the universe, and everything. And then I got involved in some trainings, which is when I did my original mentorship and trained to teach self-esteem courses and power of purpose courses through a program called the More to Life organization, who are still going and are wonderful. And we did some work around forgiveness, and we were invited during, it was like a weekend workshop, to write a list of all the people that we needed to forgive. And I thought, well, probably everyone I've ever met. I lowered my bar and just thought, yeah, I could probably, feel a little bit of resentment or a grievance about anyone, really, if you ask me. And so I started writing my list, and I got to number 36. And I thought, yeah, probably resent my mum as well. So I wrote her name down. And then what was significant about that was that my mum had had multiple sclerosis from the time I was 15. By the time I was 18, she was seriously unwell, unable to walk in a wheelchair. By 20, I'd left university to go back home to look after her and my brother and my dad. And so, like, my resentment had a lot of shame around it. Like, how could you resent somebody? I mean, even though I was happy in some ways to look after her, I was also resentful. And because it's someone who's unwell, you are even allowed to admit that you have a resentment against somebody who's unwell. So it kind of opened up a whole door of things that we resent people for, that we don't admit that we resent people for, like someone dying or someone who abandons us, that's maybe more obvious, but, or we resenting ourselves, so more of the sort of subtle ground. And so that was really what inspired my interest. And then, fast forward a few years or maybe even a decade or so, and I stayed interested in forgiveness as a practice, and I took it on as a personal practice. So I have always kept, since then, a forgiveness list. I still have a forgiveness list. If people annoy me, they go on my list. I do my work. Sometimes it seems much more now less personal to me, as in I've done more work on it. We used to say, when I worked on the retreat, we used to say, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. So that kind of historical work is done, although there's, obviously layers. And at the same time, my resentment is often about things that I can't control. So at the moment, the way the world is, there are people on my forgiveness list who are doing things and making choices that I don't necessarily agree with. And that's who I do my work on at the moment. And I also have, and as I talk about it as a practice, it's the same as having a meditation practice or a yoga practice. You don't go, oh, I've done yoga, it's like you've done it for that day or that week or whatever, or you've done an intensive over the weekend. But so forgiveness for me is the same kind of thing. It's a mental and emotional well-being practice that is an ongoing thing. So people come on your list, you do your work, they come off, they go back on again. Maybe, it's like there's an engagement with it. And what for me is so important is it means that my heart is free to do other things that are more important, like make music and feel as though there's no stickiness or lumpiness between me and the other people who are in my life. And if I feel that, or, sometimes I can hear myself saying things, I'm thinking, I need to put that person back on my list and do my work, and it can be a little thing. Like I had a gig a few weeks ago, and one particular friend didn't make it, and quite a few friends, couldn't make it, but this particular friend didn't make it, and I got hooked, and I could feel it, and I could feel my little kind of, I see. So that, and it's only a little thing, but there's a little bit of shutdown in the heart, and then I'm not reaching out to make a connection, and then I'm thinking, well, I wonder what it was that was so much more important, and watching myself, because I know about my mind, which can be very tricky. being fine with some other friends who didn't make it. So why am I hooked on this
That
particular
one
friend?
person, yeah.
Yeah. Like what I have expectations and I'm not letting this one off the hook, but
Mm,
these ones are fine. So that means it's something inside of me. It's not the fact that it's a friend who didn't turn up to the gig, because I had several.
yeah.
It's and the thing that I'm making it mean. And
Mm,
that's the other part that I'm really interested in, is the inclusion of the meaning making and the mind in our resentment. So often it's because we've made a story out of something that's happened. We've taken it personally. We've made it mean more than it does. You
yeah.
know, this particular friend, how could she possibly choose her new puppy over me? That
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it's like being able to untangle, and I talk about untangling the mind and the heart, because we do talk a lot about mental health, but I really feel like it's mental and emotional well-being that we need to be talking about. We're not really very good about talking about our feelings or making a distinction between our thinking and our feeling. We'll say things like, I feel betrayed, but you think you've been betrayed. What you feel is usually a combination of
Yeah.
being angry or hurt or bewildered. So unless we are aware of that, and I think generally culturally in the West, where our language, especially English, makes it easy for us to talk about the two things as if they're the same, and they're not, and it can be helpful to understand the difference. That's a
Mm.
long answer to your
No,
question.
but it's really, I think it's really important to understand, why you started this work, because that then just gives it context in relation to, why you're so passionate about it. It was
Yeah.
interesting because two of the things that I picked up when you were talking about that was, two words I got was a trigger. So, like when you were talking about your friend, why was it her that you had an issue with and not the others? So what is it in her that I would then think is reflecting in me that's triggering me? That's kind of the way that I would look at it, or, that's kind of my definition. The other thing is about the story. So I think
Mhm.
that it's just fascinating, the stories we connect to things and people, and then that story, how incredibly amazing it becomes in our head.
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
and often half the stuff that we're imagining, like for you with your friend, you could have put this huge story around it, when actually she, they may not have been well or something, I don't know, but we put this huge story around these things, and then unless we ask, and unless we then reconnect with that person, we don't know. So then we hold on to that story, and the story becomes the thing.
Yeah, exactly. And often we don't check.
Yeah.
We've made the decision, right? Well, that's it then. If she can't be bothered to come to my gig, well, then that's it. Then we won't, as opposed to, I'm curious what was going on,
Yeah.
and me taking responsibility for my reactivity, as opposed to blaming her,
Mm.
saying I was really hurt that you didn't come, but I was hurt because I made it mean something, like
Yeah.
she doesn't really care about me, or I'm not as important, or
Mhm.
she's always like that, or it's like it's my story that's the
Story.
hurtful thing. And again, culturally, we have more of a, it seems to somehow things have got twisted where you're responsible for not triggering me. But how
Mm.
would you know what triggers me?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's up to me to like take responsibility for when I'm triggered. That's my cue to go, oh, I wonder what my mind might be tricking me about,
Mm.
or what resentment am I holding that I hadn't noticed I was holding, and
Mhm.
adding that person to my list and doing what. So it's having an active engagement with the being triggered thing, as opposed to just going, well, then you shouldn't speak to me like that.
Yeah.
Good luck trying to control the world.
Yeah.
And again, I know we're both in the empowerment business. It's like we're wanting to empower people to take as much of um, the inner resilience away from trying to control events from the outside, to how can I make myself strong enough and with enough capabilities that I can meet the challenges of life with my heart still open as opposed to shut down, and be able to untangle my mind from my heart so I know what's, which one's which, and to stay present even when I'm feeling uncomfortable, but to get curious about it rather than just to make somebody else wrong or responsible.
And I really love too when you said that, this forgiveness work, how it just then creates space in your heart to be putting that energy into other things that you really, and I actually felt that in my heart when you said that, because you and I talked about this when we first met about, I believe that if you can forgive yourself or others, I think it's the biggest gift that you can give yourself, because it's so freeing. You free yourself from the story, from all the feelings and the emotions, all of that sort of stuff. And you usually learn something about yourself because it's usually a mirrored thing. And just then when you said that about the heart as well, of how it's freeing up the heart, that's really resonated with me. It's really, really beautiful, of that whole gift of what it gives.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lightness. And there have even been some scientific studies about when people do forgiveness work, they measure how high they can jump before, and then they measure how high they can jump afterwards. And then literally they can jump higher, and their perception of hills is that they're less steep. So it's not even just like a, theoretical emotional lightness. It's a literal physical lightness. And also it's one of the best things that you can do for your health, as in your cortisol levels, your stress levels, your blood pressure, all of those things. Because when you're not carrying grievances, like, you literally are free, or freer, to engage with life. And we, I think, don't really realize the weight that we're carrying until afterwards. And when I work one-to-one with clients, the most common response at the end is that they feel lighter. I mean, there is literally, a lightness of the heart. And I was remembering one woman that I work with on one of the retreats that I work on, and she was in her 70s, and she'd experienced abuse as a child. And she said, all of that bad feeling that I've been carrying in my heart, gone. So powerful, because you're choosing to let it go. And it doesn't, and just because it's like, you're just choosing to let it go, doesn't mean that it's easy, which again is like what my book was about, to make it as easy as possible, to kind of, to remove aside all the obstacles that there are, so that you're more likely to be able to do it. Because the other reason I think it's so fascinating is because it's one of the hardest things that we ever do. Like, what are you holding on to? Where is it? You haven't got muscles, but somehow there's something that's being held. It's not just a memory. It's kind of somehow held in the body. And so how do you know what's holding it, or how do you let it go? It's like, when you do like a tricky maneuver in yoga, it's like, I don't even know how to move that part of my body. I don't know if the muscles are there. And it's the same thing with forgiveness. It's like, it's a muscle or a release that we don't even know. Most of the time we're not aware that we're holding on to it. And and this, I do find this amusing quite often, is quite a lot of people don't admit that they're holding a resentment, or they even deny that they're holding a resentment, when all of their friends would go, yes, you resent your mum. And in fact, I got some feedback the other day from somebody going, I think you should do a bit of forgiveness work on that. And I'm like, good point. Yeah. So, so it's just, I think, and again, culturally, we have more of a predilection towards holding resentment. It's like, we think it looks cooler, and it's like, I'm going to get revenge, and I'm going to stand up to the man, and I'm not going to, because we confuse forgiveness with not keeping clear boundaries, or like it's the weaker position, or you're letting go of something where you should stand up. And the truth is, forgiveness is not about relinquishing boundaries, and it's not about saying things are okay when they're not okay. It's about what you're choosing to do in your own heart about the thing that happened. You may also keep really clear boundaries. You may litigate. You may, have a really difficult conversation with somebody, and the relationship, it's not about staying in when you shouldn't stay in. Sometimes you have to vote with your feet, but it's more about about your internal relationship with that person or the thing that happened.
Mm.
And also what's wonderful about doing your inner work is it doesn't involve doing it with the other person. It's not like mediation or reconciliation. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to reconcile, but the way I work with people is like you're doing it in the realm of your imagination, which means you can go anywhere, do anything. There are no limits. And it means you can also do forgiveness work on people who've died, which is essential. If, say, for example, somebody died suddenly and you didn't have a chance to say goodbye or have final conversation, which is quite common, you can retrospectively do that. And in fact, I heard this lovely term today. Apparently in the Japanese tradition, they call it a wind phone, where you speak to the person who's died, like in an imaginary way. And that's exactly what I do in the process work that I do with people.
Wow.
And it's very healing. And even I've worked with some clients and they've said, oh, you know, my parent didn't get to meet the grandchildren. And so in their realm of the imagination, you let that happen, you let the meeting happen, and they weep because it's so real. Because in your imagination, you can't tell the difference between whether it's real or imaginary. And and the body has that response. And what's amazing as well is the talking about carrying the resentment. I mean, the Latin, the original, the origin of the word comes from sentir, to feel. So resentir, to resent, to feel again. So the cortisol, all the different chemicals are coursing through your blood, time and time again. And you're the one who's sort of like, wearing your teeth down from grinding in the night, and the chemicals are in your blood, not in the other person's.
Not in the other person's, yeah. And I think one of the interesting points too is that, when I think a lot of people think that if they forgive someone, that then they have to like them again. And I think that, with that woman who was 70, I'm assuming that I would assume at 70 that possibly the person that abused her is probably not around anymore. But it doesn't mean that she then has to restart a relationship with this person. You can forgive someone and still not like them. It's just that you've let go of that resentment, all of that anger and the story to be able to free yourself up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because they're off doing their thing. One of my favorite quotes is forgiveness or holding on to resentment is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person is bothered by the smoke. And I love that because it's that, like, you're the one, you are the fuel that's being burnt up, and the other person's like, they're not even in the fire. It's like maybe the smoke will get them. And I love it because it just expresses perfectly how pointless it is that we hold our resentments. And there are reasons why we hold resentments, which is what I also talk about in my book. There are good reasons why we hold our resentments, because it seems like we're getting something out of it. And funnily enough, when a friend of mine, she first read my book, she said, it made me realize why I like my resentment so much.
Because there's a story, there's a benefit, it's all of that sort of thing. And the other thing that I thought was interesting too, I'll just touch on this and then we'll go to a commercial, but I thought it was really interesting when you said, when you started doing this work and you thought, oh yeah, there's probably some people, and you kind of got to your number 37 on your list. And I think, we're probably all walking around, if we don't do this sort of work, with a huge list. And one person might just take a little part of your heart or, that heaviness. But then if you start going to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, probably 100, that weight, no wonder people feel so much lighter, because that weight of another person and then, another person and then another, it just slowly builds up, and we build the resistance towards it. We just keep taking on a little bit more. But then when we realize how big it is, it's a very heavy burden.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to say more about that. So
yes,
I will.
Let's hear from our sponsors, and we'll come back and we'll definitely touch on that, because I think it's, I think that there's something there definitely for us to explore. So we'll just hear from our sponsors and we'll come back in a couple of minutes. Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you, Barbara. So just before we went to the break, I was just talking about how when we go through life, we have one person that we need to, well, we maybe need to do some work on, and that burden becomes very heavy. So you were going to add to that, Barbara?
Yes, I'd love to, because again, I think of having a kit, if you like, of the basics. If you think about everybody's life, so you will have had parents of some kind or guardians, so people who were your original carers, extended family, sometimes siblings or not siblings, school usually. So, there's going to be people in school, maybe a teacher who said something like called you lazy or something, or, a kid in the playground who bullied you or whatever. And then your first heartbreak. And then, like maybe a crabby boss or something that tricky that happened. And then maybe an ex, so I'm on 8 already. And that's without even trying, and then you've got like other people, in your sort of like wider circle, maybe neighbors or, whatever. And so when I host the forgiveness fields, which is like a practice place, so it's a bit like coming to a yoga class. So you bring something on your list, and I guide everybody through the process at the same time. So in 90 minutes, you've done a bit of release work. And I do have people who come back, not every month, but because I host them once a month online. But I get at the beginning, I get people to write down their own list. So that's private to them. So they just write down their list. And then I invite them to write down the number of years they've held each one of those resentments. And so if you're a bit older, then sometimes you can have resentments of like 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe years. And then you total it up. And so most people have at least over 100 years worth of resentment. Most average, I would say 300. And so in a group of like 20 or 30 people, you're talking about thousands of years of resentment in one tiny, weeny little Zoom class. And then you look at the world and you think, I wonder why it is the way it is and why we can't seem to work out how do we make the world work for everyone. And we have this resentment, and then I'm going to say, do that back, and then that, and then I'm going to take revenge for that, and then I'm going to retaliate for that. And my whole heart longs for intelligent leaders who are going, how do we make the world work for everyone? And part of what you're going to need to know how to do is forgive.
Yeah.
And another quote, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, without forgiveness, there really is no future. And I believe that's true, because unless we work out how to do the work of the heart, we're just not going to be able to make things work in our individual lives, but then in the wider picture. How do you overcome trauma? If you have more war, you're just creating more and more traumatized individuals who then need to do more, deeper, harder work. And we've already got 2 world wars behind us of traumatized people and then their descendants. So, it's a mess, and we could do something about it. And that is my fascination. Like, say we all went into a different kind of like a forgiveness lockdown. You had 2 weeks and you had to clear everybody off your list, even if it was 36 people. It takes sometimes when I work one-to-one with clients, we can take maybe 2 sessions and 90-minute sessions, 2 or 3 sessions to do one person. Mum or dad can sometimes take that long if there was a lot of abuse or it was a very challenging circumstance. Most of the time, in 90 minutes, you can clear a resentment of somebody. So that means, it's like it's an achievable goal. Talk about, achievable potentials. So we could potentially, as a humanity, go, okay, this is important. I'm going to free myself of all my resentment and then see what happens. So technically, we could create a world where there was a lot more peace, or maybe even the potential for global peace. And so then the question is, why don't we? Why don't we do it?
Yeah. I think that there's a benefit. It's a benefit for people to hold on to. It's a story. I think, I could probably write a list of 10 or 20 things that I think, why we don't. But very interesting. I feel like that to forgive someone, particularly if we're talking about trauma and abuse, I think it's I've had to do some work myself on that in the past, and it's almost like I've finally found the courage within myself to actually do the work so that I can let it go. Because you kind of got to, there's work that you have to do and things that you have to remember and all of those sort of things. But also then, as I said to you before, the work that I've done on some things that have happened in my life, it doesn't mean then that I like that person. It just means that I've forgiven them and myself, and then I've just freed myself from it. But it was about, you get to a point, it's a little bit like when you're doing healings or any type of work on yourself. I feel like that you just get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm ready, and I feel like I've got the courage and the confidence to be able to do that work because I'm just ready to let it go.
Yeah. And you're right, because it's like you have to feel a certain level of inner security and resilience to be able to face what you need to face. Sometimes I talk about forgiveness and grief being like sisters, because they're often interwoven, as in when you do your forgiveness work, you need to grieve what you lost or what was taken from you or what you didn't have. Sometimes we lose things, sometimes we never had them in the first place. And that again is the subtle ground that you can cover with forgiveness work, because our parents aren't perfect. Sometimes it's what they don't do that is as traumatizing as the things they do. And so it's grieving the reality of your experience. And in fact, I think the Course in Miracles quote says something about giving up all hope of having had a different past. That's the surrender.
Oh yeah.
Is where you're really meeting the reality. And just as you say, you release yourself and you release the past, and it doesn't mean you have to go back into a relationship with that person. Sometimes it's not healthy or safe to do that.
No.
And you keep clear boundaries. But I think you get clearer about what boundaries you do want to keep when you've done your forgiveness work. And sometimes if I'm working with couples, they'll do their forgiveness work. So I'll work with each of them separately. They'll do their forgiveness work. And then they get really clear about whether or not they want to stay together or not, because there's nothing else in the field. There isn't lots of old built up resentment. And that often is what drives couples apart, is just literally the build up of unexpressed grievances. And you don't necessarily want to express them to your spouse. When I talk about forgiveness, I have this illustrations like all of this stuff. I don't want to going, oh, Megan, this is all the stuff that, you annoy me about you, because it's like, it's a bit overwhelming. You want, like, if I sort that out, if I let go of all that, then I'm going, it's that. Can we have a conversation about this particular aspect of our relationship, as opposed to just all the things I resent you for? And a lot of what we resent people for are just, they're our pettiness. When I was doing forgiveness work on my mum, I resented her for wearing pop socks. That's me. That's my fashion sense. That's nothing to do with her. That's not even a legitimate resentment. But, when you're doing your resentment work, it really helps to confess the full extent of it, so that you feel like everything is off your chest. And then you don't have to bring it into the relationship, because it's been aired in the safe context of a forgiveness field or a one-to-one.
Wow. Now, talking about your book, so I know that you've got an audience offer for everybody watching today.
Yes. Yeah. So the first 2 chapters of the book, and I know it means that you have to read it, so there's a bit of engagement, but the advantage of reading the first 2 chapters is it gives you a really clear definition of forgiveness that I use, which is one of the obstacles, is not really knowing, what do we mean by forgiveness? What is it? What isn't it? And also outlines the 5 biggest obstacles. And obviously I go into them at greater depth in the book, but it just lays that all out in the first couple of chapters.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you. That's very generous to offer the audience that. And in your book, then, do you actually then take, like, is there, in the full version of the book, is there then a process that you can learn through the book to actually do this forgiveness work yourself?
There is, yeah. So there's 5 obstacles. So I go through each of the obstacles, and I talk about why they get in the way. And then I share my 7-step forgiveness made easy process. And there's also a free download. When you buy the book, there's also a free download of me guiding you through that process, which is great for everyday stuff, as you know, but also if it's challenging or if there's been a lot of trauma, then I would work, say it's better to work one-to-one with me, or another counselor, or to come to a forgiveness field, because I'm live, and so I can answer questions and stuff like that. So sometimes there's things that people want to be a bit more involved in.
Okay. That's
great. But you do, the book has the whole process,
right?
And I have had feedback. If you look at my Amazon reviews, some really, really heartwarming feedback where people are just saying it's so helpful to have this perspective. To people from different religious traditions. There was an imam saying, this is the best thing I've read about forgiveness, and other people saying it changed my life. I did the process and it changed something between me and whoever it was. So really, really heartwarming.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so talking about the obstacles, so what are the obstacles to forgiveness that you write about? Like what when you say obstacle, what do you mean?
What I mean is things that can get in the way that we're not necessarily conscious about. So, for example, having a definition of forgiveness, like really knowing granularly what it means, can be really helpful. Because if you're thinking that forgiveness means letting people off the hook, or it's the weak position, or it's saying it's okay when it isn't, or it might mean reconciliation, or it's, somehow saying that this is okay that it happened, as opposed to, no, this is wrong. I mean, there's never going to be a time in which any kind of physical, mental, or emotional abuse is okay. It's not okay. A lot of it's illegal, in the extreme, and needs to stay, unacceptable and illegal. But there's a difference between it being unacceptable and unforgivable. And what's interesting, again, I'm kind of conscious as well about the zeitgeist, is that there's more of a movement now to like, well, you don't have to forgive. It's, it's like, if you've been traumatized, it's like this sort of hands off, don't sort of bully the person who's been traumatized or victimized into forgiving. And I agree, there shouldn't be an insistence that you do. It's more that the liberation is for you, that you do. It's like that is part of how you heal from your trauma, is by releasing the resentment that you've held against that person or that event. That is a really special kind of healing that can happen, that is like nothing else. I mean, I have worked with lots and lots and lots of people who say, I've been in therapy for decades and this reached places that never reached, which is, it's true. It's not like this is better than therapy. It's a different thing. Meditation is one particular modality. Forgiveness is a particular modality. Therapy is a particular modality. It's like they're not conflatable. They're different things, and they all need to be done as part of your therapeutic process. You may well need to do forgiveness work. I think everybody needs to do it, but I don't force anybody to do it. And so having the definition of forgiveness, that's like one of the major, like, beginning things to do is, and I can share with you the definition that I use that came from one of my original teachers, K. Bradford Brown, from the More to Life organization. And he says that forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. So it's the absolute refusal. So that is truly like hands off. So hold ill will, which is what we talked about, that kind of holding on against someone for what they did or didn't do, which I love. I just love that, because it's often we resent things that didn't happen as much as the things that did. And it's really simple. It's like, I am choosing to not hold the ill will. And if you think about the, like the resentment, like a sort of somehow a barrier, or it feels like you've got something. And so to do this relinquishment of like having, like I said, your heart open, that then means that you feel the vulnerability and you feel the grief and you feel, it's like we're going to feel a lot of things. And so no wonder we prefer the self-protection of the resentment. I mean, that makes sense. And again, K. Bradford Brown says, resentment is the power of the powerless. When I don't have any power, holding my resentment makes me feel like I've got something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another one of the obstacles is our unwillingness to feel our vulnerability, because we don't want to be vulnerable. The weird thing really is that being able to release your resentment makes you stronger. It seems ironic, but to actually let it go. And in fact, I did check with ChatGPT who would win, Darth Vader or Yoda. And because Darth Vader, his energy and his power comes from actually his trauma, but his hatred and revenge ultimately, but his goodness is still in there at the very end. But ChatGPT reckoned that Yoda would win, and that's a different kind of force, because you don't see Yoda holding resentment.
Yeah.
And I think that if you think about like spiritual exemplars, they're not the ones who hold the grievance. Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi. I mean, these are all people who are masters and who stay with their hearts open in the most challenging circumstances, who prefer to release their resentment than to hold on to it.
Hold on to it. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the more work you do on forgiveness, I think the more you I think probably your confidence grows, but also you start to really enjoy that feeling of, oh, I've let that go. Thank goodness that one's gone. Okay, what's the next one? Whereas when you're looking at your first one, I suspect, when you started to do that work on your mum, you thought it feels like I suspect a big mountain, but then I suspect you get into this rhythm of, yep, I can do this work. It probably becomes quite quick as well, because most of your heavy stuff is, and I feel that because being a spiritual healer, for years and years ago, like sort of 15, 20 years ago, I started doing the heavy work. Now for me to do something for myself and work on myself, it's quite quick, because it's really just happened. I haven't held on to it. Let's just heal it and move on. And so I suspect that the more forgiveness work you do, the quicker the process is.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also why I don't want to hold on to any resentment. I don't want to have it in my field. I want to be free. I want to be able to resonate at a different, like higher level of resonance. I don't want to carry that old crap around with me.
Yeah.
And so I have a choice. And it doesn't, and the weird thing is, you have to admit it. It's like, it is, forgiveness work is not all la, la, la light. It's shadow work. It's, I think this, I am this dark that I judge this person for their pop socks, and I resent somebody who's unwell. And so it's like, it's a real willingness to go into the darkness, but so that it can be released.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we're talking about forgiveness, that connects in with mental health, how does the forgiveness work then impact our mental health?
Well, it's a relief and a release to be able to have a way of working through those things. So normally something happens, the woman at work who you've always felt a bit weird about says the thing, and then you're, really annoyed, and then you're thinking, I don't want to go into work anymore. And, like they're ganging up, all of those things can get untangled by doing forgiveness work, because you can identify, oh, actually, no, I've been resenting her since the beginning because I'm competing with her, and I didn't stand up for myself when we could have got a raise or whatever, I didn't say anything, so and again, a lot of it takes humility and a willingness to really almost like out yourself about, oh, I'm doing this. And so it's having, for me, that's why I'm like the next book that I'm in the middle of writing is about tools that you can use, 5 essential practices for mental and emotional well-being, because I think, especially just the way things are in the world, you need ways of working through the challenges that we face. I mean, there's some things that we can't do anything about, but the things that you can do something about, you want to be able to feel that you're empowered to do something
Yeah.
about them.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I completely understand the concept, but I just had that aha moment when you said it's almost like admitting to yourself that maybe, depending on what it is, I may have played a part in it. I've created the story. What's the benefit to me to even creating this in the first place? And I think that courage to actually look within yourself and to admit to yourself that that's what you're thinking or that's how you're judging, I think is probably the biggest obstacle.
Yes, exactly. So that would be the third one, would be all the secret ways in which your resentment is serving you, even though ultimately it's detriment. But you have to see that there are, like I was saying about this, the protection. That's the most common reason why we hold resentment. And sometimes it's a very protective mechanism, and it's essential, and it's a very intelligent coping mechanism to hold on, because we don't have another resource. But when you're still holding on decades later and you do not live at that house anymore, it's time to let go of your grip. And sometimes you have to realize, oh, well, if I let that go, maybe I need to make a different decision about my life. Maybe I can't blame my parents anymore for my lack of whatever it is, or I can't make that person responsible, or I can't make excuses. Like I can't justify stealing the stationery from the office because of that boss.
Yeah.
It's like we have ways of doing transactions in our minds, or even the moral high ground. And I know that that's one of my payoffs for resenting people on the world stage. I feel I have no power, so I can't do anything about it, but I have the moral high ground because I'm right and they're wrong.
Oh,
And
wow.
but the downside of feeling like you have the moral high ground is that it robs you of your humanity and your humility. And who do I really want to be? Do I want to be a self-righteous prig, or do I want to be somebody who's a human being who's like recognizing that certain things need to be done? And rather than using my energy in my fueling my resentment, using my energy to do what I can do to make the difference that I can make. So to focus on forgiveness, to, anybody who's interested in doing forgiveness work, they're my people. Like it doesn't matter how long you've held it, or it doesn't matter what religious background you have. If you are stuck and you want help to do it, and there is a way to do it that I have, that I've really studied, what are the things that help forgiveness happen and makes it feel like it's authentic, makes it feel like it's complete, because that's really important. So feel like you've done something, even if it's just in inverted commas in your imagination, but you feel like you've been through a process, a bit like an undoing vow. Like when you get married, you say words in front of people and exchange things. It's the same kind of thing. So we're unexchanging, we're reclaiming things back. Like if you didn't have a voice, somebody, like as a child, you didn't get to say the things you want to do. So in the imaginary process, you reclaim things like your voice, your power, your innocence, whatever it is that you need to reclaim, and you return things that aren't yours, like responsibility that was put on your shoulders too young, or whatever it is. So there's that part that happens so that you can untangle yourself from an old dynamic so that you're free to participate fully and wholeheartedly in the world.
Wow. Now, I'm just going to ask you this last question. If you can answer it just in a few words, is there any downside to forgiveness? Is there any negativity to forgiveness?
I don't think so. There are books around, like they're called Unforgivable, and there's another one, Why You Don't Have to Forgive.
Yeah.
You don't have to forgive. That what looks like a downside is staying in an abusive relationship, but that isn't a downside of forgiveness. That's a downside of staying in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, there isn't a downside, because why wouldn't you want to release yourself from the inner torture of yourself? Because you can't change the past. I mean, literally holding the resentment. I can do this. I can die. I can be on my deathbed going, yes, I still resent that person. It hasn't changed a single thing. No one is benefiting from my resentment.
Yeah.
But I would argue everybody benefits from forgiveness. And
Yeah.
Charles Eisenstein and like other writers like Rumi, so he says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And Charles Eisenstein talks about the forgiveness field, which is why I call them forgiveness fields, because it's like there's an energy and a resonance of, I am willing to keep my heart open even when it's difficult. Because if you think about like the great exemplars of forgiveness, like Jesus Christ, for example, how many times should I forgive? 70 times 7. That's every single time, no exceptions. It's like keeping your heart open, loving your neighbor as yourself, even when you don't want to, or it doesn't, but it's not about being abused and laying yourself open to not setting clear boundaries, and things that are wrong are still wrong.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oh my gosh, look, can you believe that we've actually only got a couple of minutes left, like literally a couple of minutes left? We could have, I've only just gotten through half of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. Thank you. But before we go, I'd just love to ask you the same question that I love all my guests. So can you share, you've been very generous with your quotes through our conversation, but do you have a favorite quote?
I have so many quotes that I just adore, but the one that I'll leave, which is I just love, and this is it's a spiritual quote from the poet Hafiz, and it's called "The Divine Invitation." I don't know if you know it. It's a poem, and it basically says, "You have been invited to meet the friend." That narrows all our choices down to just two. You can come to God dressed for dancing, or be carried on a stretcher to God's ward.
Wow.
And I just love it, because it's like either we come with our hearts open full of joy, or we come with our hearts full of resentment and sorrow, but either way we'll join.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that I feel like that just sums up everything that we've spoken about today. Barbara, thank you so much for our conversation today. I have learned so much. As I said, I've had many aha moments, and I just want to thank you for just sharing a different perspective of how forgiveness can help yourself and others, and how it can transform people's lives. So just thank you for your generosity.
It's such a pleasure. Really great to talk to you. And also, I would love to come back, because there's more. We haven't even touched on self-forgiveness, or
there's so much to talk about. So thank you, Barbara. And I also just want to thank all of our amazing and dedicated audience, our supporters and our sponsors. And I just want to wish you an amazing and beautiful weekend ahead. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks again, Barbara.
Thanks, Megan.